I was scrubbing marinara sauce off the dinner plates when she called him over. Jason, come here, honey, tell your real dad what we talked about, Heather said, her voice sugary sweet. I turned my head just slightly. Jason was still holding the salad tongs he'd been using to serve himself earlier. His socks were mismatched. He looked like a normal 10-year-old kid, except the smile on his face wasn't one I recognized. Heather pressed her thumb to the screen and put her phone on speaker. Jason snorted a little laugh, then said in that cocky little voice kids only get from mimicking someone else, "Hey, Dad. Mom says Tom's just a loser who's good at folding laundry." The voice on the other end laughed, too. I didn't recognize it, didn't need to. It was the tone that stuck, the shared amusement of two people bonding over how pathetic I was. Heather didn't flinch. She smirked and tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder like it was a commercial, like she just landed the joke. I looked at her. She winked. It was deliberate, calculated. She wanted me to hear it. Not just the line, the message. You're not his real dad. You're just the help. I didn't throw anything. Didn't slam a door. I finished rinsing the plates, dried my hands slowly, and walked out onto the porch. I could still hear her behind me. He'll get over it. She didn't know she'd just detonated something irreversible. Back inside, Heather popped open a can of sparkling wine and called her friend from Pilates. He just walked out. I swear he's so dramatic, she whispered with a little giggle. Jason ran to his room, headset on, yelling about Fortnite. No one noticed that I didn't come back. What they didn't know was that the garage door didn't close behind me. I left it open on purpose. I went to the safe, not the digital one, the old fireproof one that uses a manual dial because I don't trust batteries. Inside was a folder, brown, a little dusty. I hadn't touched it in 6 months. It had one word written on the front in silver ink. Fiduciary. The irony. I never wanted it to come to this. But the moment she let her son humiliate me, our son, as far as I was concerned for the entertainment of an ex she swore was toxic, the moment she smirked like my dignity was disposable, I knew I wasn't protecting Jason by staying. I was enabling her, and I had promised myself if she ever involved him in one of her games, one of her little performances, I would stop being polite. So, I unlocked the second compartment, pulled out the original trust documents, not the copies she kept in her fake bamboo filing drawer under bills and boring stuff. These weren't copies. These were the originals drafted and signed by Charles Mercer himself, her ex-husband's father, a man who ran a commercial lending firm for 40 years and believed in 3 things: discipline, boundaries, and protecting his grandsons from their mother's performances, as he once called them. I was just a placeholder. Funny, she forgot who the real placeholders were. Every vacation, every car upgrade, every tennis lesson, all placeholders, every single one funded not by her financial independence, but by Charles's legacy trust. And if she thought the old man didn't monitor behavior, she clearly hadn't read the clauses. She didn't know what Section 4, behavioral violations, even said. But I did. I laid the papers out under the garage light, found the flag clause, highlighted it again, even though I'd already done that months ago. Then I opened my email, subject line, concern regarding minor trust disbursement fraud Mercer Boys. Attached, her calendar invite titled Girls Weekend Wine Country, her Instagram story where she held up a glass and said, all paid for, baby. The screenshot of the May 9th transaction pulled directly from the educational fund. Tutoring disbursement, $3,750. It didn't go to a tutor. It went to an aromatherapy spa in Sedona. I didn't include commentary, just the facts. At the bottom, I wrote, you asked me to notify you if she involved Jason in any targeted humiliation. Today was that day. I hit send. Then I went inside, picked up my car keys, looked at Heather. She looked at me like I was being petty, still sulking. No, I said, I'm thinking about laundry. Guess I'll go fold some. She laughed like she'd won. Like that moment on the phone was just a funny little jab. She didn't know what had just started. Because when the man holding the leash gets pulled, it's not the barking dog that feels it first. It's the one tied to the gate. Heather had this little routine she'd perform at dinner parties. We'd be seated with the usual suburban crowd, real estate couples, orthodontists' wives, a yoga instructor with a podcast. And after 2 glasses of Pinot, she'd tilt her head just so and say, "I'm lucky. I got out early, got my own income, own assets, didn't need a man to survive." There'd be laughter, nods, the inevitable follow-up from someone new. "Wait, so how do you manage this place all on your own?" "Oh, I have my ways," she'd purr, swirling her wine like it was a blood sample. She loved that moment, that second of suspended disbelief, like she was some self-made mystery. What she didn't mention, and what not a single one of them ever thought to ask, was why every automatic payment in our household came from a third-party account titled Mercer Legacy Holdings. She never talked about Charles Mercer. She didn't like the idea of old money that wasn't hers. But Charles, he noticed everything. You see, when Heather's first marriage collapsed, and let's be clear, it was a Category 5 collapse, Charles didn't scream. He didn't fight for custody. He didn't cut anyone off. He just moved money around, built guardrails, and said 6 words to her during that final bitter meeting: "If you break the rules, you're out." She laughed at the time, thought it was just posturing. But what she didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Charles Mercer's trusts didn't just track spending. They tracked behavior, not by spying, not by invading, by watching patterns. Which meant when Heather charged $2,000 to Crescent Hill Children's Books, the account noted it. But when that same charge showed up on her GPS history as Crescent Hill Boutique and Spa, the system quietly flagged it. And Charles didn't need to call. He just waited. I didn't. After that speakerphone stunt, I sat in my office with the lights off and opened the folder. Every screenshot, every red flag transaction, every story she posted while claiming educational expense, they were all there. A $480 candle she labeled as a sensory tool for reading improvement. First-class tickets to a parenting conference in Napa that doubled as a vineyard tour. Jason's tutoring budget mysteriously aligned with her buttocks schedule. She wasn't clever, just smug, and she had no idea that buried inside the trust documentation on page 6, subsection C, was the clause no one talks about. In cases of manipulation involving a minor or misappropriation of educational disbursements, the grantor retains the right to immediately revoke privileges and assign temporary custodial reassessment. Plain English, screw with the kid's money and the old man gets the kid. She'd never read it. She bragged about not reading it, said once, "Charles writes his contracts like he's still doing M&A work. My lawyer said not to worry." She misunderstood what kind of lawyer she'd hired. She thought she was the chess player, but Heather didn't even know what board she was sitting on. I added 4 new documents to the folder that night. Dated receipts, time-stamped stories, a screenshot from Jason's savings account showing a $7,300 withdrawal labeled STEM camp taken on the exact day she flew to Palm Springs. Then I drafted a letter. Simple, clear: "Charles, per your request to report behavioral violations involving trust misuse. Attached are the disbursements and corresponding non-educational expenditures." I believe the clause under Section C may now be relevant. I've said nothing to Heather. Let me know how you wish to proceed. I didn't send it yet. I stared at it for a while. Part of me wanted to throw the whole thing away, walk back into the kitchen, let her win. Because admitting this out loud, even just in writing, meant admitting I'd wasted years pretending things would change. That maybe if I was just kind enough, patient enough, silent enough, she'd become a mother worth defending. But she hadn't. She'd weaponized her son, and Charles had warned her, so I had to send it. Then I poured myself a drink. Heather wandered in barefoot, wearing her silk robe, the one she bought in Barcelona on Jason's educational tour. She smirked, still mad about the phone call. "Jesus, Tom, don't be so emotional." I sipped the bourbon, didn't look at her. "I'm not emotional," I said. "I'm just reading fine print." She rolled her eyes and walked out, muttering something about how I always ruin the mood. I didn't ruin the mood. I just shifted it, because what she didn't see, what she never saw, was that the man she thought was quiet and passive had just pulled the first string, and the marionette was about to lose her stage. It was a Tuesday. Not that the day mattered, but I remember because she made cod again, which she only ever cooked when she was trying to convince herself she was still the kind of woman who read wellness blogs and drank green juice in the morning. The kind who could look someone like Charles Mercer in the eye and call herself a modern mother. She thought that cod and quinoa somehow made her look credible. I was walking past the hallway that leads to her little home office, the one she decorated with fake succulents and a Boss Babe neon sign, when I heard her voice rise in that smug, performative way she saved for her phone calls with friends. I swear, Charles only sees what I show him. He still thinks I'm using the funds for the boys. As long as I keep posting a picture of Jason reading once a month, he won't ask questions. She laughed. So did whoever was on the other end. He's old money, she said. Not tech money. He doesn't even know how to log into the app. I could say I spent it on a NASA tour and he'd believe it. I didn't say anything. I didn't interrupt. I just stood there for a few seconds, long enough to hear her pour another glass of wine and say something about booking the St. Helena suite again. That night, while she was in the bath, scrolling through Instagram, no doubt, I logged into the trust portal. Not hers, the boys'. She didn't know I had access, but I'd helped Charles's accountant set up a redundancy system 2 years back, just in case she ever forgot a password and Jason needed something fast. The interface was clean. Under withdrawals marked educational enrichment, June 14th, $3,100, summer STEM program. August 2nd, $2,800, college prep seminar. October 11th, $1,600, tutoring retainer. December 19th, $3,400, winter literacy workshop. All of them bore the same vendor code, a holding name I recognized. I opened our joint credit card records, matched the dates. They lined up perfectly with the spa resort in Calistoga, a boutique handbag store in Beverly Hills, first-class tickets to Napa, a reservation, a restorative forest bathing retreat. The kicker, the tutoring retainer. That was the week she went to Vegas. I stared at the screen for a long time. The anger didn't hit right away. It was more like cold water in a dark room, slow, disorienting, then deeply sobering. I wasn't just dealing with a selfish woman. I was looking at someone siphoning her own son's future to fund her illusion of sophistication. And I knew deep down that if I confronted her then, she'd twist it. She'd laugh. Say something like, "You don't know how the trust works." Or worse, "You're just jealous you didn't think of it first." So, I didn't say anything. I opened a folder on my desktop and named it Backups. Inside it, I dropped screenshots, receipts, flight confirmations. Then I started cataloging her social media posts. August 3rd, the day after the college prep withdrawal, manifesting my next level sparkles briefcase. Photo, her in a silk robe holding a mimosa. Ocean view behind her. December 20th, the day after the literacy workshop charge. Self-care isn't selfish, it's survival. Tagged location, Solstice Wellness Spa. The captions were never about the boys, never about reading or education. Jason was in exactly one photo that entire month, holding a tablet, watching cartoons. It became a pattern, a rhythm. Withdraw, indulge, post, lie. At first, I told myself maybe she just didn't understand the long-term damage. Maybe she thought she'd pay it back later. But the more I watched, the more obvious it became. This wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. She was leveraging the trust like a corporate card. And the worst part, she believed it made her clever. There was no remorse, just performance. She'd complain to her sister about how hard it is to be a single mom in a blended family while clicking add to cart on designer flats. She post inspirational quotes about raising kings right after transferring money out of Jason's college savings to pay for a juice cleanse. It wasn't just fraud, it was parasitic. So, I started printing. Not just files. Photos, captions, account statements. Every piece of evidence tied to a date, a disbursement, and a lie. I didn't know then how long it would take to matter. but I did know that if the time ever came, if she ever involved Jason in something she couldn't walk back, I'd be ready. Not to fight, to reveal, because unlike Heather, I didn't need to win the narrative. I just needed her to write it in her own handwriting, and she was doing that beautifully. The moment I hit send on that email to Charles, I knew I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Not because I was scared of fallout, but because I was done pretending this was salvageable. Done pretending I could protect Jason by protecting her. I didn't frame the email as a betrayal. I didn't paint myself as the wounded husband. I simply attached the receipts and wrote, May 9th, October 17th, cross-reference with her public posts. Catch and dates are visible. The withdrawals were marked literacy and enrichment and STEM tutoring respectively. But the locations Sedona and Montauk tell a different story. That was it. No emotion, no plea for help, just facts. Charles didn't need drama, he needed evidence. And when he had it, he moved like a scalpel. No blood, just precision. By the time I closed my laptop, Heather was in the bedroom scrolling vacation rentals on her tablet, humming to herself. "You want to go to Chilum?" she asked without looking up. "I thought we were on a budget," I replied. She laughed. "Oh, please, the trust can handle one more girls' weekend." She didn't even try to hide it anymore. That's what stunned me. Somewhere between the wine retreats and healing sabbaticals, she'd convinced herself the money owed her, that Charles had set it up not for Jason and Ethan, but for her, to maintain stability as a single mother. She didn't know that Charles's idea of stability looked very different. His stability clause, buried on page 11 of the trust, explicitly defined misuse as applying designated funds to non-developmental, cosmetic, or recreational purposes for persons other than the named minors, and any violation involving misrepresentation or deceit triggered Clause 4A, colloquially known to his lawyers as the Grandfather Clause. It gave Charles personally the right to freeze distributions, revoke privileges, and recommend immediate custodial reassessment. He didn't need court approval. The clause had been used only once before, on Heather's cousin, Ava. That story ended with Ava's daughter living with her paternal grandparents and Ava teaching yoga in Boise. No one mentioned it at family dinners. Heather, of course, never read that far. She once joked, Charles's contracts could put an Adderall addict to sleep. But Charles never joked. So while she clicked book now on a weekend retreat in Aspen that claimed to offer soul realignment and luxury soundbathing, Charles's private office was already parsing her social history with timestamp metadata. He didn't even call me back that night. He didn't need to. But the next morning, a message landed in my inbox. No greeting, no signature, just, understood. This will be handled quietly. 8 words. 8 bullets in the chamber. Heather, meanwhile, was on the phone with Shelby, her Pilates friend, saying things like, "I just need this getaway. You know, Tom's been weird lately. All serious. Like, lighten up, bro." She told her the cabin had a cedar sauna and complimentary sage rituals. Jason's staying with Tom, so I'll finally get a break. That's how she saw it. Like I was the live-in nanny, the backup singer, the emotional janitor. She didn't ask what I was doing that weekend because she'd never asked about the folder or the letters or the calls. She assumed silence meant surrender. That's the problem with people like Heather. They believe the quiet man has no teeth, that if he's calm, he must be weak. But she forgot something crucial. I wasn't the one paying for her spa weekends. Charles was. And Charles Mercer wasn't a quiet man. He was a patient one. That weekend, she bought a new carry-on, leather, $720, charged directly to the same trust that was supposed to fund Jason's speech therapy. She posted a photo of it to Instagram with the caption, "A queen never explains her crown airplane # deserve it all." I screenshotted it, not for Charles, for myself. Because I wanted to remember the last moment she felt invincible, the last moment before the leash snapped. The countdown had started, but she was too busy packing bath salts to hear the ticking. At 7:42 a.m. exactly, Someone knocked at the front door. Not the casual knock of a neighbor, not a delivery driver's rush. It was precise. 3 knocks, spaced evenly, intentional. Heather was in the kitchen pouring oat milk into her overpriced espresso machine, still in her robe. The satin one she ordered last week from a site called Mason Lux. She was humming something, probably still high off the dopamine hit of booking her Aspen retreat. I was seated at the table with Jason. He was poking at a bowl of cereal while watching a YouTube video on how to build something called a redstone trap. He didn't look up. Neither did I. Heather padded barefoot across the foyer, yawning as she pulled the door open with the same nonchalance she used when greeting DoorDash drivers. Then she froze. I looked up just in time to see her body stiffen like she'd just seen a ghost in a 3-piece suit. "Charles," she said, almost a breath, like the name itself didn't fit in her mouth. He stood tall, crisp gray suit, pocket square, a leather folder in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. Not a word, not a smile. His expression was carved from granite. Heather tried to recover. "Is everything okay? Did you call first?" Charles didn't answer her. He looked past her, straight at me. His eyes didn't waver. Then slowly, he looked down at Jason, who had tiptoed around the corner, curious. "Good morning, son," Charles said, his voice steady. Jason blinked, unsure what to say. Then Charles turned back to Heather and held out the envelope. "Go pack his things," he said. "You're done." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. What are you talking about? What is this?" Charles held the envelope steady, his hand never shaking. "Page 1. You violated the behavioral clause. Custodial suspension is now active." Heather didn't move. Jason tugged on my sleeve, whispering, "Why is Grandpa here? What's happening?" I squeezed his hand. "Nothing you need to worry about, buddy." Heather's voice came back, too loud, too shrill. "This is a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. If this is about Aspen, I can explain." Charles didn't flinch. "Don't insult either of us." She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. A single sheet of paper slid out. Thick stock, a legal watermark glinting faintly in the foyer light. She scanned it once, blinked. "Read it again." "This is absurd," she snapped, but the paper in her hands said otherwise. The letter was addressed formally to Heather Elizabeth Monroe. It cited 3 dates, listed the matching withdrawals, referenced public photographic evidence, and included a direct quote, "Charles only sees what I show him." She had said it out loud, on speaker, while holding a glass of Merlot. She turned on me. "You did this? You're seriously trying to take him from me?" "No," I said calmly. "You did that all by yourself." "I didn't mean it like that. Jason loves me. He needs me. You can't just show up with a letter." "Heather," Charles interrupted, his voice like steel sliding into a sheath. "This is not about love. It's about breach of contract, of trust, of character." Jason looked between us, confused. "Where are we going?" I knelt beside him. "You're coming with me for a while. Grandpa thinks it's safer that way. Just for now, okay?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay. Can I bring my switch?" "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. Heather's hands were clenched now. The robe she once flaunted looked like a costume. The house around her suddenly too big, too quiet. "You don't have the right," she whispered. Charles tilted his head. "Page 1, Heather. You signed it." She stared at the letter in her hand like it had bitten her. "This isn't fair." "No," Charles said. "It's precise." Then he turned to me. "You have 48 hours to gather what you need. After that, the trust's legal team will handle everything else. I suggest you call the school and notify them of the custody change." I nodded once. "Already did." Heather let out a weak, incredulous laugh, like someone trying to pretend they're not drowning. "You plan this?" "I documented this," I replied. "Planning had nothing to do with it." Charles turned to leave. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't need to. Heather stood in the doorway, frozen, clutching the envelope like it might disappear if she squeezed hard enough. As the door clicked shut behind Charles, she slowly sank onto the stairs. No screaming, no denial, just silence. She finally understood. The game wasn't just over. It never belonged to her in the first place. The envelope looked like any other. Off-white, heavy linen stock, a neat seal across the back. But it may as well have been a guillotine. Heather sat at the bottom of the stairs, her robe slightly askew, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the paper like she could hold her world together by sheer pressure. She read the first page again. 1. Temporary removal of custodial authority. Pursuant to Clause 4A of the Mercer Educational Trust, the grantor has determined a material breach has occurred involving misrepresentation of disbursement usage and the psychological manipulation of a minor. As such, temporary custodial privileges for Jason Monroe are revoked, pending court-supervised mediation. Her lips moved as she read it, like mouthing the words would soften the blow. Jason peeked back in from the hallway, cradling a small blue backpack. "Mom," he asked, "are we still going to the beach house this weekend?" Heather blinked, still staring at the page. She didn't answer him. He looked at me. "Are we going?" I crouched beside him. "We're going somewhere better, bud. With fishing poles and space to breathe. You'll like it." Heather still hadn't moved. I watched her thumb through the next page. 2. Suspension of trust distributions. Effective immediately, all disbursements from Mercer Family Trust B household maintenance and lifestyle, Mercer Family Trust C transportation/auto, and Mercer Family Trust D entertainment/recreation are suspended pending full audit. Subsection 4 noted the following. Monthly mortgage on 2249 Windermere Court, $3,870. Lease payment on 2021 Audi Q8, $1,290. Club or membership fees, $12,600 annually. Family counseling sessions, $18,200 withdrawn over 13 months with zero documentation from a licensed practitioner. I could see the blood drain from her face. Not instantly. It was slower, like someone bleeding from an invisible artery, the sort of realization that seeps into the bones. She always said, "It's not like Charles checks every line item." And technically, she was right. Charles didn't. But the software did. Each trust had monitoring protocols tied to expenditure keywords. Education, wellness, and enrichment were high-frequency terms flagged for manual review. The family counseling line, that was the key. She'd been using that category to fund everything from personal trainers to hotel stays during what she called mental reset weekends. The system only needed a nudge. I gave it 1. Heather dropped the first 2 pages beside her and turned to the third, the thickest of them all. 3. Financial Activity Summary, Mercer Minor Trusts. A full 3-year breakdown. Every transaction coded by type, compared against external data sources, including GPS logs, social media posts, vendor databases, and time-stamped receipts. June 14th, $3,100, marked as STEM Summer Camp. Location match, Meadowstone Spa and Healing Retreat. Caption posted, "When the universe says rest, you listen." Sparkles person female. October 17th, $1,600, tutoring retainer. Vendor matched to A-List Aesthetics in Santa Barbara. Check-in at location confirmed. Heather skimmed down the list. There were over 30 flagged transactions, each tied to some petty indulgence she had narrated online as empowerment. Her wellness was funded by her son's future, and now her future was bleeding out in bullet points. Jason had wandered into the kitchen by now, pulling a juice box from the fridge. "Mom," he called again, "can I bring my snorkel stuff?" Still no answer. She was staring at one line in particular. March 21st. $5,280. College preparatory deposit. Actual use. Private wine tasting plus Airbnb stay with female friend. Receipt confirms 2 guests. Violation code 3B. Willful misrepresentation. Her mouth twitched. Not a full grimace, not a sob, just the subtle crack of someone whose performance script had finally run out of lines. I stood behind her. She didn't turn. "You knew the rules," I said quietly. She flinched at my voice like I'd slapped her. I never thought he'd actually, she whispered, then stopped. No, I said. You thought you were special, untouchable. I was just trying to, she began, then shook her head. It's not like I hurt anyone. I stepped closer, voice still even. You used Jason to humiliate me. You drained his future to build an Instagram life. And now you're shocked that the man funding all of it decided to step in. She clutched the documents to her chest. I didn't think he'd cut me off. I thought he loved me. That was it. That was the hinge. She thought Charles's money was love, that his silence meant approval, that she was gaming an old man too proud to call her bluff. What she didn't realize was that Charles had only ever tolerated her, and the love that went to the boys, not her. Jason came back into the room, holding up a pair of swim trunks. Can I bring these? Heather turned slowly to him. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying yet. Yeah, she said softly. Put them in your bag. He looked at her, confused by the sudden softness. Are you coming, too? Her mouth opened, but she couldn't answer. She looked down at the papers in her lap, then away. Jason stood there a moment, holding his trunks like a question. When she didn't speak, he walked back down the hall and into his room. Heather finally looked up at me, eyes glazed with something new. Not rage, not panic, something heavier. You're not taking him, she said, voice low. You're replacing me. No, I said. You replaced yourself. And for the first time, I saw her believe it. By 9:15 a.m., Heather was on the phone with the first of 3 law offices she thought might still represent her. She still had the envelope clutched in her handbag like it might be radioactive. Her sunglasses were on even though it was overcast, and she wore a trench coat cinched too tight, like she was trying to armor herself with fashion. Hi, this is Heather Monroe. I need to speak with Julian Graham immediately. It's urgent. She was standing in the marble-floored lobby of one of the top estate litigation firms in the county, the same one Charles had referred her to 2 years ago when she wanted to solidify custodial clarity over Jason. Of course, that request had been mostly about blocking her ex-husband's occasional parenting attempts. But back then, Charles had obliged. Now, the receptionist gave her a tight, professional smile and said, I'm sorry, Ms. Monroe. Mr. Graham is unavailable at the moment. May I take a message? Heather didn't blink. Tell him I'm activating the emergency clause. Section 7 of our family agreement. He'll know what it means. The receptionist typed something politely. 2 minutes passed, then 5. When Julian finally appeared in the hallway, he wasn't carrying his usual leather-bound folder or offering his half-smile. He looked like someone who'd just been called into HR. Stern, careful. Heather, he said flatly. Oh, thank God. Did you see what Charles did? This is completely out of. Julian raised a hand. Let's step into my office. She followed him inside, already unpacking her grievances like she was late for a monologue. But the moment the door clicked shut, he cut her off. Before we go any further, I need to inform you that as of this morning, our firm has suspended representation under Clause 14C of the retainer agreement. She froze. Suspended? Julian looked exhausted. As you know, your retainer is funded via Mercer Trust B. That trust has been frozen, and we've been advised that your actions may fall under review for breach of fiduciary standards. We can't legally advise you while the source of our payment is in dispute. You can't just drop me. Julian opened a drawer, removed a single-page document. Per protocol, here's your notice of suspension of legal services. We'll provide a list of third-party firms not affiliated with the Mercer network. She didn't take the paper. She just stood there, mouth slightly open. I have rights. Yes, he said. And you'll need to find another attorney to enforce them. He didn't offer to shake her hand. He didn't say good luck. He just opened the office door again and waited. When she stepped back into the lobby, her heels suddenly sounded too loud, like gunshots in a chapel. Outside, she got into her leased Audi paid for by Trust C, now suspended, and sat behind the wheel for a full 5 minutes before pulling out her phone. Charles didn't pick up. She tried again. Voicemail. She tried his assistant. Disconnected. She scrolled, teeth clenched, until she found the number she swore she'd never use again. Her ex-husband, Jason's biological father, the one she used to refer to as Charles Jr. With a sneer, he didn't answer either, so she left a voicemail, voice trembling but clipped. "Hi, it's Heather. I think there's been some confusion regarding Jason's custody and the trust accounts. I need to talk to you before this escalates." The voicemail cut her off. She called again. Blocked. She looked at the screen. For a moment, she just stared. Then she called again. "Please don't do this," she whispered when the call went straight to voicemail again. "This isn't what you think. I'm still his mother. I didn't." Her voice cracked. "You know what this is doing to me." Click. End of recording. She sat motionless, one hand still on the wheel, the other covering her mouth like she could trap the panic behind her fingers. She finally drove home. The house looked exactly the same, but it wasn't. Not anymore. No funds to maintain it. No firm to defend her. No Charles to run interference. No son waiting at the door with his favorite drawing. Everything that made her life feel expensive, powerful, untouchable gone in a series of closed doors and unanswered calls. No explosions. No scandal. Just silence. Legal, cold, suffocating silence. She wandered through the living room like a guest or a ghost. The phone in her hand buzzed once. Low balance alert. Personal checking. She looked down and let out a bitter laugh. One of those dry, involuntary bursts people make when even irony has abandoned them. She dropped the phone on the couch, let it bounce once, and for the first time in over a decade, Heather Monroe had no plan, no leverage, no one left to call. The mediation room was sterile, quiet. No judge's bench, no jury, just a long table surrounded by chairs that felt too firm and lights that felt too bright. A faux plant wilted in the corner, like even it didn't want to be part of this. Heather walked in wearing the same powder blue suit she'd bought for her deposition 2 years ago when she tried to argue for full custody over Jason after his dad missed a weekend visit. She thought it made her look sharp, competent, maternal. Today, it hung on her like it had aged without her. Charles was already seated. Notepad, pen, glasses folded on the table like weapons laid out for cleaning. His face was unreadable. I sat across from him, calm, hands folded, a thin folder resting in front of me like it wasn't the last nail in a very expensive coffin. Then she saw him, Jason's father, Derek, seated at the end of the table. Her ex-husband, her plan B, the man she used to weaponize in stories about deadbeat dads whenever she needed sympathy points. She flinched. "What's he doing here?" she asked sharply, her voice cutting across the room like a snapped string. "He has joint legal standing," Charles replied flatly, "and he's entitled to weigh in, especially now." Heather took the last empty seat, clutching her bag like it might still contain something to save her. A mediator stepped in, middle-aged woman, calm, too kind for this room. "We're here today to assess temporary custody arrangements and financial stewardship of the minor trusts. The goal is cooperative resolution." Heather jumped in immediately. "There's no need for all of this. Jason lives with me. This has gotten blown way out of proportion." Charles didn't even glance up. "Heather, stop talking." The mediator gave her a warning look. "Let's proceed in order." I opened the folder. No drama, no performance. I slid a single sheet across the table. "She used Jason to humiliate me on a speakerphone call in our kitchen," I said quietly, "and I could have lived with that. But what I couldn't live with was what I found afterward." The mediator picked up the paper. Charles leaned forward just slightly. Even Derek tilted his head. Heather was already shaking her head. "That's not what it looks like." $11,487, I said. That was the total withdrawn from Jason's trust labeled as an educational enrichment package the same day she flew to Sedona for a wellness retreat. I looked at Derek. "Do you know what Jason was doing that weekend?" Derek frowned. "I know. I thought she said he was with her sister." I nodded. "He was. but she hadn't told her sister he was coming. Dropped him off with a bag of frozen chicken nuggets and a dead tablet. No schedule, no schoolwork, no check-in. The mediator's eyebrows rose. Charles remained still, silent. Heather reached for her bag. I have receipts. I can explain. Do you have a receipt from a tutor? Charles asked, not looking up. She froze. A reading instructor, he added. A STEM facilitator, a single invoice for anything tied to the label you used. I didn't think I needed to. I mean, the categories are flexible. They're not, Charles interrupted. Derek let out a low breath. Jesus, Heather. She turned to him, defensive. Don't act surprised. You've never contributed to those accounts. You've never helped. You don't get to play righteous now. Derek held up a hand. You lied to me. You told me those funds were untouchable. You said you didn't need me because of them. I didn't, she snapped. Until he got involved. You used your son's money to pay for foot massages and moon crystals. Charles cut in. Don't blame him. Heather's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was surgical. The mediator finally spoke. Given the circumstances, we'll proceed with reassignment of temporary custodial authority to the petitioner, Tom Green. Pending review. Heather jolted. You can't just give him my son. No one's giving anyone anything, the mediator said gently. We're ensuring Jason has a stable, honest financial guardian. That's what this process is for. Derek leaned forward. For the record, I support Tom's custodianship. Jason's always been safe with him. And clearly, Heather needs to get her priorities straight. The words stung. Heather stared at her ex-husband like he'd turned into a stranger. She looked at me, but I didn't meet her gaze. This is insane, she muttered. It's a smear campaign. You're all ganging up on me because I dared to build a life after the divorce. I stood and gently closed my folder. I wasn't trying to ruin your life, Heather, I said. But you weren't building anything. You were draining Jason's. And with that, I walked out. Charles followed. Derek stayed behind a moment longer, then said softly, almost as an afterthought, Jason asked me the other day if I was still his real dad. I didn't know how to answer, but I do now. Heather didn't respond, because for the first time in that room, she had nothing left to say. Heather had exactly 60 minutes, not a second more. A court liaison arrived at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Clipboard in hand, expression neutral like she'd done this 100 times before. She wasn't there to debate. She was there to observe. Heather opened the front door without a word. Her makeup was smeared like she'd fallen asleep in it, or hadn't slept at all. Her voice had no tone left, like everything inside had been hollowed out with a soup spoon. The house, usually filled with the faint hum of whatever self-care podcast she liked that week, was silent. No playlist about boundaries or abundance mindset, just the sound of her bare feet on the hardwood as she climbed the stairs. Jason's room hadn't changed. His walls were still plastered with posters of sea creatures and monster trucks. His favorite plush shark was still flopped sideways on the bed. The nightlight in the corner, shaped like a jellyfish, was still glowing faintly because he always forgot to turn it off. Heather stood in the middle of it, not moving, not touching anything. Her hands were trembling. She should have started with the essentials: clothes, toothbrush, school supplies, but instead, she just stood there staring at the tiny pile of drawings Jason had left on his desk. One of them showed 3 stick figures, a tall one with glasses, a smaller one with spiky hair, and a third one holding a fishing rod. Above it, in scrolled pencil, me and Dad and Tom at the lake. She touched the paper like it might disappear if she blinked too fast. Downstairs, the liaison called out, 50 minutes remaining. Heather opened the closet. She pulled out his small duffel bag, the red one with the patches he insisted on adding after every trip, and started filling it mechanically. Shirts, pants, the black hoodie he wore 3 times a week. She paused when she saw the t-shirt that said, "My dad can build anything." It was from last year's Father's Day gift. Jason had insisted I wear it to the cookout. She stuffed it deep into the bag, out of sight. She moved like she was underwater. Every sock folded was a confession. Every toy she touched, an indictment. Then she heard the footsteps. She turned. I stood in the doorway. No anger, no smugness, just stillness. I didn't speak right away. I stepped into the room with something in my hand, a photo. I walked to the nightstand and placed it down gently. It was Jason holding a fishing rod, grinning with one missing front tooth, the lake behind him glowing in late summer light. I was beside him, arm on his shoulder, both of us soaked from falling in. Heather opened her mouth to say something she wasn't even sure what, but I knelt down to Jason's level, my back to her. "You're not a mistake," I said quietly to the boy. "You're the best part." Then I stood up, looked at her one last time, and walked out, leaving the scent of cedar and sunscreen and everything she used to mock me for lingering behind like a ghost. Jason didn't say anything either. He just picked up the photo and looked at it for a long time. Heather tried to fold another shirt, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. 40 minutes, came the voice from the hall. She folded faster, sloppier. She tossed his sneakers in, not caring if they got dirty. Jason looked up. "Why can't you come, too?" he asked. She blinked. "What? Why can't we all go to the lake house again?" Her breath caught. "I don't know, baby," she said, her voice cracking. He went back to the photo. She felt the pull of something ancient, maternal, desperate, drowning. But it wouldn't rise. She couldn't explain. She couldn't fix it. Because how do you explain to your son that you lost him for brunches and facials and affirmations written in gold cursive on your Instagram stories? That you traded his security for sage bundles and hotel robes? That you let a man who loved him, who raised him, be mocked on a speakerphone call just to get a laugh? That you weren't sorry then, but God, you are now. She packed in silence. Jason held the photo like a compass, and when the hour was up, she stood in the doorway and watched as I took his hand. Jason didn't look back. He didn't hug her. He just walked to the car, photo in hand, bag over his shoulder, like this was just another weekend trip. But it wasn't. It was a departure. Quiet. Total. The liaison locked the door behind them. Heather stood in her son's empty room, surrounded by things that smelled like him, sounded like him. My voice whispered in her memory, "You were never paying attention." And when she finally sat on the floor, it wasn't to cry. It was because her legs gave out. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Certified, stamped with a return address she recognized immediately, Mercer Holdings, embossed in deep navy over parchment white. No warning, no preamble, just a delivery that thudded against her front door like a final verdict. Heather didn't open it right away. She made a cup of tea first, tried to calm the tremble in her hands. The house felt cavernous now, empty in all the wrong ways. Echoes where there used to be tantrums, cartoon soundtracks, my slow, deliberate footsteps down the stairs. She sat at the same kitchen table where she used to hold court, where she used to sip wine and laugh about taking back her life. Now the silence felt heavier than any judgment. She slid the envelope open with a butter knife, careful not to tear the edges. Part of her still clung to ritual, like precision could delay inevitability. Inside were 3 sheets, neatly stacked, coldly factual. To Heather Elizabeth Monroe, Re. Final notice cessation of trust disbursements and custodial privileges. She skimmed it once, then again. The words didn't blur. They sharpened, effective immediately. All Mercer family trust distributions B, C, and D are permanently terminated. Any future communication, visitation, or custodial requests regarding Jason Monroe must be formally petitioned through the court and reviewed by an appointed evaluator. Mercer Minor Educational Trusts Jason and Ethan have been reassigned to custodial oversight under Thomas Green, by express written request of grantor Charles Mercer. She stopped reading. Her hands were still. No tears, just a strange, vibrating stillness in her chest, like her lungs were trying to disappear from the inside out. She flipped to the last page. At the bottom, beneath the signature line, Charles had scrolled a single line in black ink, his handwriting impossibly steady, impossibly final. Tom was never a placeholder. He was a wall you mocked, And now you have no roof. Heather stared at it. The words didn't shout. They didn't rage. They whispered. And somehow that was worse because they weren't just true. They were earned. She set the paper down on the counter next to her untouched tea. She stood and wandered through the house. No real purpose. Just the reflex of someone trying to wake up from something too quiet to be called a nightmare. The living room still had the leather couch Jason once jumped on until the spring squeaked. The hallway still had a faint stain on the wall from the time she spilled beet juice trying to film a detox reel. The upstairs hallway had a framed quote that now mocked her with eerie accuracy. "You are the architect of your reality." Heather sat on the floor beneath it, not collapsed, not crying, just sitting, like a guilty queen in the ruins of her own castle, waiting for a verdict that had already arrived. Because she finally understood what Charles had done. He didn't destroy her. He erased her. Legally, financially, maternally. With documents, with signatures, with silence. I hadn't screamed. Charles hadn't scolded. Jason hadn't begged. They had just walked away. She was no longer relevant to the system she had exploited. She wasn't central. She wasn't tragic. She wasn't missed. She was gone. Paperwork filed. Trusts reassigned, authority severed, and even worse, no one had celebrated it. No one gloated. That was the part that stung more than anything. Because for someone like Heather, silence wasn't absence. It was annihilation. Outside, the wind picked up. She could hear a bird chirping on the porch. A car engine started 3 houses down. Life, indifferent, continued. Inside, she sat alone in the house she'd once paraded like a crown. And now it was just echo. Just walls. Just consequences. No roof.